episode. Damn, Johnny, it's been a while since you've been on the show, huh?
Yes.
Don't you
Well,
own like half the show?
I do actually. I think, or no, quarter of the show.
I'm trying to take over a third.
A third of that's
Third of the
right.
show.
I
Yeah,
own a third of the show. I've been really busy.
I
So
know. I've been busy trying to stay alive.
yeah,
We'll talk a
yeah.
little bit about that later.
Way later.
But we
Oh
have
yeah.
a special guest we've been trying to get on the show for quite a while now. You guys know him as Gilly Graham on the Instagram.
On the Gram Jam.
Gilly
Hmm?
Graham 18 or something, right?
Yeah, Gilligram 18.
Nice. But your real name is Nick. Nick
Yep.
Gill.
Nick
Oh
Gill,
man.
Raj.
Gonna have a bunch of baby mamas now coming after you. They heard you on the show. I was listening to the Bottom Dwellers and Nick,
Yeah.
you got two sons.
There are no women who listen to this show.
There are no women that listen. Well, they've got like a handful. A
Wait, they
handful
still
of
have
women.
diver groupies? I thought diver groupies would have gone out of fashion by now.
It has gone out of fashion.
Yeah.
It didn't work for my wife. She couldn't care less.
Suckered in.
Yeah, well, you
Couldn't
say
care
that now,
less.
but after Last Breath, I think everybody's diving stock has gone up.
Oh my gosh! Did you see the movie?
No, I haven't seen it yet, actually.
Okay.
So,
Well, it's
have
it's
to
just
see.
like the documentary.
Yeah, did you watch
Yeah.
the documentary?
Yeah, I watched a documentary, but only
Well,
once. That was it for me.
You watch the movie then.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'll definitely give it a whirl.
I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait until it comes out on Netflix or something.
Have you ever taken a
Peacock.
nap on bottom, Nick?
I have.
Oh,
I have.
All right. Well, if
And
somebody
to be
was
fair,
filming,
it wasn't in RC. It was,
Oh.
some of their stuff is not very exciting to say the least. They got some
Jeez
stuff that
Louise.
just stand by and wait, and you just make yourself comfortable and fall asleep.
have you dove the North Sea?
Yeah, I did. I did a couple trips out there in 2023. It was or 2021. I did about 3 or 4 trips out there, and then I was working for a North Sea company out in Azerbaijan and then West Africa and Brunei.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So you've been all over the place with this trade, huh?
Yeah. It's a bit of an everywhere bear, and I've got to see both sides of the coin, so to speak, because there's always that rivalry that exists. IMCA versus ADC, Gulf versus everybody else kind of thing.
Oh,
So
Gulf America, right?
yeah, Gulf of America. That's not
Gulf
going to
of
help
America.
anybody now.
No, it just sounds weird. I'm a Goa
Yeah.
diver, right?
Yeah, it doesn't roll off the tongue. I find. I
It
don't know if
sounds
it'll
better
stick.
Gom. Yeah,
Yeah.
going to the Gom. I can't say
Absolutely.
I'm going to the Goa. Get my boa going to the Goa.
Yeah, no, it doesn't ring the same at all.
So where'd you go to dive school there, Nick?
So I did College of Oceanarian. Well, I went to a bunch of dive schools, but I started off at College of Oceanarian, and
Yes.
that was. I mean, at the time, it seemed like the best program around. It was long. Everybody was like, you could have done the same thing at Ocean Core, one of those things, in like half the time or whatever. But how the school was set out with, like, what was it, 20 weeks for the specialty and then 30 weeks for the diving. But I thought it was a good system, and then from there, ended up in the Gulf of Mexico shortly after that. But because I was an international tender, I always had people chirping in my ear, like, oh, you could go here, you could go there, but you got an ADC ticket, and that's not recognized here, and it's not recognized there, and stuff. So in 2003, it was a bunch of tenders and myself. We were all international tenders working together. And we went to PDC in South Africa and did a conversion for the, an HSC IMCA equivalency for, what we already had. And then after that, I ended up going to INPP to do my SAT course, later down the line, because same thing, I'd gotten into SAT in the Gulf of Mexico and was doing SAT, through that system, which, like everything else, you kind of, they break out into SAT. There's no formal schooling or whatever. But then you get too blocked, and people are like, oh, well, if you could go and do SAT here and there, but you only have an ADC ticket, and that's not valid here and there, and so on and so forth. But so there's been a few dive schools, to say the least. But yeah, College of Oceanarian was the start.
So if you want to do the SAT route, you have to get more education. At least
Yeah,
back
well,
then, right? I mean, now you kind of do still too.
you definitely have to get the well, I think the ADC ticket is now more internationally recognized.
Yeah.
But there was that period there where it wasn't, and the big thing was, I think they don't do is it like a 40-meter dive or a 50-meter dive, which is a requirement for the IMCA ticket. But like College of Oceaneering, we never went deeper than the harbor, basically.
Yeah, you couldn't go
I
deeper
think
than-
DIT is the only school that offers it when they go out in the bay there or whatever, and they have their one deep dive off their barge. But everybody else, basically it's just tank diving.
Nice. So you did end up cutting your teeth in the Gulf, huh? Right after the coup.
100%.
Nice.
100%. Yeah, yeah. And I still to this day consider myself, a Gulf diver, because I mean, say what you want about the tendon system, it has a lot of merits, and there were a lot of guys that they worked hard enough, or they worked until they broke out and they did their time, and then after a while they're like, you know what, I've had my fill. But sort of breaking out was always the goal for fellas,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, that was just more or less the culture. And to be fair, at the time I thought I would have been at Global for the next 20 years.
Yeah. Nice, man. So it had to have been somewhat frustrating to have broken out, dive sat in the Gulf, and then try to go overseas, and they say it's not good enough. How did you
Yeah,
get through all that?
it's you have to kind of wrap your head around it, because there are a lot of guys this side of the pond that like first time working out in the Middle East, I was working with a lot of English guys and stuff from all over. And guys would tell you, oh yeah, I've got 10 years, 12 years, but you're working with them on deck or you're diving behind them and you're like, do you? And then you come to realize that a guy's been like an inspection diver. Now, coming from the Gulf where everybody's like a jack of all trades, you'll never meet a guy that is, I'm just an inspection diver and doesn't do any sort of construction work. So to have these guys that were experienced in their own right, but it was like their first day on the job as far as construction went, and this is going back now like 2008, 2009. So post Katrina, everybody and their dog had a job, and they were just bringing people off the street. But you'd get on a job, and first thing first, the first time anybody ever asked to see my logbook, and I was like, well, that, but I'm working for Global. I'm a global guy. Like, why are you asking me for that kind of stuff? But as far as they were concerned, you were just some random guy off the street. And then you come to find out like guys didn't know how to hydrotight and do these sort of things. So it is frustrating because people still look down on the Gulf system, and I think they, for whatever reason, they like to diminish it because it's not a paperwork chase. You guys you put in your time, you get your experience. It's a real life apprenticeship. You learn on the job, and you get the requisite amount of dives, and then you break out. Whereas out here, guys have, their 3-1 and 3-2 inspection tickets, and some guys have all up in 3-9 and all this other stuff. So it's more, I feel, like an academic pursuit on this side of the pond than it is an actual get your hands dirty.
Right. I mean, that still sounds about right now as well, because in order to really break out in the Gulf, from what I've been told, you have to get your hands dirty. You
Yeah.
can't just be there. You have to do the mud hole jobs. You have to
Yeah.
do, all the crap work as well in order to even be considered to,
Yeah.
jump into SAT at some point. So
Yeah.
yeah, you definitely literally have to like cut your teeth and, work hard. And from what I've seen, just personally, a lot of times when SAT guys from other areas come over and try to do inland work, like I'm also an inland diver, inland construction, it's hard for them to keep up because they're not
Yeah.
used to that. You're right. The first
Absolutely.
time I heard I'm an inspection diver, that was like the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
It's like there's no such thing. At least there should
Yeah,
be
exactly.
such thing.
Yeah. I mean, even when I when I was at College of Oceaneering, trying to decide on the specialties and stuff like that, at the time, I approached it with the same sort of mindset that, well, this is an academic thing, and the more specialties you do, the better, right? So at the time I did the inspection and I did welding. Come to find out years later, it didn't really matter. It just made the course more expensive, and I was at school, 4 days a week versus, only 2. But in the grand scheme of things, you get to the Gulf of Mexico and, having an inspection ticket meant nothing. If you couldn't pass a drug test, you couldn't get a job. No one was like, oh, well, you can pass, you failed the drug test, but you got an inspection ticket, we'll hire you. If you can pass a drug test, you're good to go. The rest of it didn't matter in the end. And then, obviously, if you can't pull your weight on deck, you tend to fall by the wayside. But
Right. Where originally do you hail from? Like, where do you call
I,
home?
I'm from Barbados, the Caribbean.
Barbados and Caribbean.
Yeah, so we like, no oil and gas industry. I mean, I didn't even know what I was getting into until basically my first day offshore. Everything up until that point was a mystery, But like, I have friends from Trinidad that obviously, they have a big oil and gas industry, so they're guys that have come up through the industry that way. But for us coming out of Barbados, and there's now like a small group of us, about 5 or 6 guys, maybe 3 are still, active in the industry. But at the time, we were a novelty, and we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into at all.
How'd you find yourself in the States? Is it just for dive school?
Yeah, it was for dive school initially because I had a friend of mine. He was,
Why did you get into diving?
well, I wanted to do marine biology at first, to be fair. And at the time I was like, maybe my grades aren't cutting it, so let me try and go down a peg. But
Typical diver.
You'd be a lot more poorer if you would have stayed with that marine biology ticket.
well, that's the thing. I had a friend at the time. Her dad was a marine biologist and stuff, and he's like, it's a thankless job. You'll do one dive and write about it for the next 5 years. Trust me, it's not what you think it is, and all this other jazz. So he's like, you kept it real. You probably are better off not going down this road. And then another friend of mine that we grew up together, and he's a little bit older, so he was working with the scuba shops at the time, and at home, basically, all the commercial work is done on scuba. So he would put in more rings and stuff like that, and over time he got to kind of get a feel for diving that wasn't just recreationally related, and the money that came with it, because they would get these sort of weekend jobs to go and put in the mooring and make a decent amount of money and stuff like that. So he came by me, I mean, we're talking late 90s, so forget iPhones and all that jazz, and he came to use the computer at my house and started looking at schools. Like, oh, this is interesting. And so we were looking at them together and stuff like that. And he was 6 months ahead of me, I think, because I was still in school and stuff at the time. Because I started, I was 20 years old, 19 years old. Yeah, 19 years old when I went to dive school. And so, yeah, he kind of kicked off that train of thought, and having kind of abandoned the marine biologist kind of idea. It seemed like the next best bet, like being around the water. Obviously, growing up on an island, you're swimming, you're surfing, and all this other stuff. So it was a natural progression, I suppose.
Right, except for you can't see anything in the Gulf, though, right?
Yeah, well, that's the part they don't tell you about, right? That you don't see much of anything. It's all, chocolate milk. When I try to explain to people what it is you do, I'm like, well, try looking into a glass of chocolate milk and then imagine, doing work in it. And that's basically it in a nutshell,
That's exactly what I said last week. I'm like, I'm gonna be swimming in chocolate milk this week.
Yeah.
Most of my work's in California, which is where you went to school. Huge
Yeah,
difference.
Yeah.
That's so cool though that you got to that you went to the coup and got to be taught by Duke Ogden. What a legendary guy,
Yeah, he's a top man. I was glad to hear you guys drop his name on a podcast I listened to a while back. And
Nice.
another friend of mine that was living in Hawaii just down the road from Duke, told me when he passed and stuff, and it was a shame, but solid dude.
Mm-hmm. That's crazy though. I mean, diving's going to be in the news a little bit more because of the new movie that came out, the
Yeah.
Last Breath. Like I said, if you saw the documentary, the movie's just the same. It's exactly like that. And but yeah, it's cool though that more people are interested in what we do, because you don't see us. We operate below the sea with no cameras.
Yeah.
And it's just something about the trade that we just fall in love with, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely, I mean, like any job, some days you're like, you don't want to be there. The water's cold or whatever. But I find, once you lock out or once you start diving, your mind sort of switches into, work mode, and it just clarity, right? And the other thing too, like in terms of mindset, guys out here are oriented around this sort of sat diver air diver mindset. So you'd be surprised how hard pressed you are to get guys to go and do an air dive. Like, oh, air diving, but once again, I'm this sort of tender diver mentality where I remember when diving was a privilege. All it took was one tender on the job to screw the pooch, and then no one's diving for the rest of the job because so and so did X or Y or Z. So like any dive for me is a fun dive, whether it's air or sat.
Nice. And where are you at right now?
I'm in the Middle East.
Nice. Can you talk about what you're
Yeah,
doing?
what's the job there?
Well, right now we were doing some. What were we doing recently?
I
We
was
were
talking to one
doing.
guy that was working in
Mm,
Saudi Arabia. He's like, "Oh, I can't talk about it." So I'm like, "Oh,
well,
okay, well,
man, you know what? I mean, it's not like we're it's state secrets. We're building an oil field, but we were putting in some anodes, the subsea anodes, ICCPs. So it's big friggin' anodes that they put in, and it runs an electrical current. I guess it's the 21st century to the conventional anodes you would see on a jacket, and tying in some flexis and some subsea valves and stuff like that. This job scope is pretty small pipe. I think we were 12 or 16 inch. Nothing to write home about. But the stuff out here is these guys are doing some heavy metal diving out here. So when we go back, I think it's like 30-inch tie-ins and stuff like that. Spools 90 meters. So it's going to be big work once we get going again, and everything's heavy. But the bottom conditions aren't terrible, but they're not good either. I've seen better out here. Like the places out here that it's rock hard bottom. It's like a swimming pool. But then there are a lot of places. I think the fields that we're in are pretty muddy. Not as bad as the Gulf of Mexico, but still pretty miserable.
mm. And then during the summer when it starts heating up, I'm sure it's super miserable too."
Yeah, it's like diving in tea, man.
I had a
Oh,
buddy that was working out there, and like he was the LT, and like on deck, he's like they had to have cooling vests, special
Oh yeah,
vests
yeah.
that they put the ice packs in and all that stuff. I'm
Oh
like,
yeah. We
dang.
had Global had an incident years back where the bellman had heat stroke. They had to send the diver back to check on him because he was just in there, sweating his life away, and eventually, he wasn't looking so hot. So yeah, it's miserable now. Like now, it's nice and cool, and you'll probably get another 6 maybe 8 weeks of decent weather. But from there, it just ramps up, and you're talking like, well, I only know it in Celsius, but like 45 degrees Celsius in the shade kind of thing. Um, which is, I know in Freedom units, it's like a million degrees or something, 100 and whatever, but it's hot.
Jeez. Where's your favorite place to work?
Favorite place.
and worst place to work.
There you go.
I would say, you know what, favorite place. Was doing some diving out in Baku, in Azerbaijan, and it's nice because the everything's close. The airport's close, the port is close, the heliport is close. Nothing more than half an hour. The bottom is nice. Fairly hard bottom. The water's cold. That's my only. I'm not a big fan of cold water, but I would say, and
You're from
it's a nice town
Barbados.
to walk around. Yeah, exactly. I like the tropics. And for the first, to be fair, like 18 years, 19 years, it was a never-ending summer between being in Asia and West Africa, the Gulf of Mexico. I never really got out of that warm water. Um, Worst place to work would definitely be India. India is hard diving, and I would say outside of the Gulf of Mexico, India is about as mean as it gets in terms of conditions, and then there is a general lack of safety, a lack of organization that exists. You're going to do stuff on jackets, and we're installing clamps, and you get there and like, oh, there's an anode in the way. All right, well, we're just gonna have to burn that out, and you're doing a lot of stuff on the fly, which makes better divers out of guys, and a lot of the international guys that I've worked with that are really really good have done a lot of time in India. But it's just sketchy, man. It's near miss after near miss, and
Jeez.
when you're rolling those kind of dice, at some point you're going to come up short.
I wouldn't have guessed it.
Yeah.
Man. But so mostly warm water. Personally, I would take cold water
Me too.
instead of warm water because you can always throw layers on, just get a thicker
But you
suit.
guys,
But
are
warm
you
water's
diving in like a
tough,
dry
dude.
suit, or are you just wearing like a 7 mil or something when
Oh,
you're in
never.
California?
No. 3 mil. 3 mil in
3 mil.
California.
Yes, this guy's
Even
crazy.
in the winter.
Johnny's
You,
crazy.
you're a
He's
better
like a
man than
polar
me.
bear. He's a
I used to
polar
clean
bear.
hulls in California. I can tell you right now, anything less than 7 mil, and my day was ruined. I forgot my hoodie one day cleaning boats out in Newport, and every time I'd climb out the water, I had a little dinghy that I was going around from boat to boat, and then every time I'd climb out the water, I'd get this crazy vertigo with the temperature change. It took me the whole day just to get like 4 boats done. I felt terrible. So
That
yeah,
is
you can
tough.
keep the
That
cold water.
cold water vertigo sucks.
Yeah.
Man, but the thing that sucks the most for me is being so hot, sweating all over the place. And the weirdest feeling is being extremely thirsty underwater.
Yeah.
I always thought that was weird. I'm like, there's
Yeah.
water all over, but I
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
drink a drop. Now,
Yeah.
given
Yeah.
I've done some reservoirs where I have taken some sips because my neck dam was a little loose and I was hot. But no, yeah, it's just like a weird feeling, just sweating your butt off in the
Yeah.
water. It's
There were
crazy.
guys that would guys used to dive in camelbacks. You know, in India, they'd modify the neck
Okay.
dams, you know, and have the little camelback thing. But I was always worried that, you know, the spout would come off and go up to reclaim or something, or you just end up having this hose blast you in the face until you know your bladder was done. So I never got into to diving with water. But you know, like working in warm water and out there is also kind of like Gulf like in the sense that there's no real rules when it comes to the diving. You know, when I first started sat in the Gulf of Mexico, you know, bell runs kind of lasted as long as they did. There was no breaks, you know, no nothing. You know, you just went until you were told to go back, and it was from lockout to lock in time. You know, and you just sort of take it for granted. India was more or less the same, and depending on what companies you work with, you know, that's kind of like, you know, the standard. And then, you know, you start diving with these North Sea guys, and it's like, you know, after 3 hours, hey, would you like to go back for a water break? Like, you can do that? Oh, yeah, yeah. So, you know, go and have water and a lunch. I'm like, water and a lunch? You know?
And tea. You gotta have your
Yeah,
tea.
so, yeah, you know, you definitely get accustomed to it. After you do that a few times, like, you know, it makes the diving more pleasant as opposed to diving until, you know, you get back and your hands are cramping because you haven't had anything to drink in 6.5, 7 hours. And like you said, you're just sweating off in the helmet.
I just think it's so cool that you've been to all these different regions that are completely different from each other. So you've seen like all sides of the coin. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
From the North Sea to India, it's like wow,
it
that's pretty
certainly,
cool.
you know, it the best thing about it is that, you know, having gone from being sort of Gulf exclusive and then slowly but surely with global, you had these guys that had that kind of experience, and they used to talk about it like, you know, this mythical land beyond the rainbow, you know, in the North Sea this and Imca that and all this other stuff. So to sort of see behind it a little bit and see both kind of like, you know, the benefits of the system, like the criticisms. Like, you know, guys used to get so annoyed when you know, you would get some of these English guys show up and they would just give them a hard time from the jump. Oh, you know, guys from the North Sea can't dive and this and that and the next. And that's not necessarily true. And then they would say, oh, well, you know, in the North Sea you only have to, you know, dive by direction and stuff. And it is kind of true, but it's kind of not, because depending on the job scope, you know, like if you're doing the you know, barrier testing, you know, they got all these subsea valves and they want to make sure that they're sealing good, et cetera, et cetera. It's an involved process. You know, you're not going to have some Yahoo down there turning valves willy nilly. So you're expected to kind of, you know, dive as directed. But from the experience that I've had with the supervisors I've crossed out there, you know, they are more or less, they do have a script that they go by. So there is no hero diving. But by the same token, if you're kind of moving the ball forward, no one's gonna really hamstring you and be like, nah, you can't do that, so to speak. Whereas, you know, in the Gulf of Mexico, if you can dream it, you can do it. You know, oh yeah, well, send me the crane because I need to yank this and pull that. All right, buddy, you know, you get what you get. So it's nice to see both systems, and I can see the merits in both systems, and you can see the drawbacks in both systems.
Okay. Because a lot of what you hear when you talk to American divers, when they're describing stuff in the Gulf, not the Gulf, in the North Sea, they
Mm.
think that it's just so much regulation that you can't get anything done. But it's
It
good to hear that
it
it's not
does. I
true.
mean, don't get me wrong. It can slow you down a little bit, and there's certain stuff that procedurally, you know, those guys don't do in the name of safety. But you know, obviously, if you have the experience and you've done it enough, there is a safe way to do it. You know, and I think that is where the distinction lays. And plus, like, the engineers drive the jobs a lot. You know, a lot of your
Okay.
dive plans and all that stuff are written high above your pay grade with people that don't necessarily, like, they've worked with divers, but they haven't done any diving. So they'll suggest you to do things that on paper it seems great, But in practice, it's either slow or it's cumbersome, and they don't like to use mechanical advantages like we use tuggers for everything in the Gulf of Mexico. You have a working tugger and a low tugger, and no one's really too bent out of shape by get up on the tugger, so to speak. But out there, everything is hydraulic, so you're blowing out your elbows, coming up on come-alongs for hours at a time. Versus, hey, let's just use the crane.
Yeah.
Put the crane on it and think, nah, we can't do that. They use a lot of lift bags. They love their lift bags.
Oh, wow.
I think lift bags are dangerous personally.
Yeah.
It's one of the most dangerous things that we use every day, and they still seem to love it, and the right procedures about it all day. But I've had more lift bags get away from me than I ever had a crane, and you've got perfect control with a crane. But you can't.
Yeah.
It's so ingrained in the culture now, I don't think it's ever really going to change.
Yeah, lift bags, they're fun to use, they're useful, but you always look back at that YouTube video of that one. I think it's an Egyptian diver that just gets carried away.
Oh yeah,
like it's Dorothy.
yeah.
It's flying up there, and then you're watching the video. Oh, that dude's dead.
Yeah, absolutely. You think he bought the
So-
farm, and it's
That's so crazy, though. You go from North Sea to India, where it's like the Wild West, pretty much over there. Still, they're still trying to figure stuff out. Huh?
yeah.
So how does it work? Like, how do you stay alive in those areas? Because you still have company standards and regulations, right?
You do, but once again, like it comes down a lot to the guys you work around, and I find like out in Asia and stuff, some smaller sort of mid-scale companies that do these lump sum jobs and stuff, they're always trying to push for time, and you certainly need to mind your P's and Q's, and over time, I got to the point where if I don't like it, I'm not doing it. I've been around long enough to be like, no one has made my career for me, and think to the point that, I'm hurting myself by saying, I'm tapping out on this one, and I don't have any points to prove, whereas sometimes you get some of these guys that they've either, they've been broken out, so to speak, for lack of a better word, by guys up the food chain, and so when they say jump, all right, fellas, jump, but you're like, that's probably not the smartest move, and you get away with it once and you think it's clever, and then guys keep doing it, and because there's no standard. And that's the other thing about the Gulf of Mexico, is that even though I only work with Global, you had guys coming from other companies feeding into Global, whether it was like Caldive or Aquatico or Stolton, whatever at the time, but everyone sort of had the same habits. Everyone still set up the impact the same way, and do things the same way. So there was kind of an informal culture or knowledge that existed, and if you broke from that, people would be quick to be like, yeah, that's not how you do it, that kind of thing. Now what I found on the other side of the pond is, whoever sort of makes a suggestion, and makes it the loudest, it now becomes an idea. And if that idea works, even if it's a terrible idea, then that's the idea from there on out. And it's like, God damn, like, I mean, we were on a job, burning some piles out for these moorings, so they hammer down the moorings. These things are massive, like 14 feet in diameter, about what would be like almost 120 feet tall. They pile them down, and then they cut off. We were supposed to cut off the excess. Gulf of Mexico, if you're having to do a cut like that and you want a guide, you take a piece of CP hose and rope, and you use that as your guide, and Bob's your uncle. The whole thing costs like $2. Man, one superintendent came up with this idea about making some metal thing that slides down over it, and use that as a guide and all this other stuff. And we're diving late into the season. There they have the monsoons and stuff, and come in like April, May, there's a groundswell that starts to build. So any work you're doing after a certain point in time, you have to factor in that it's going to be surging like that on the crane. So, guys are trying to land this hard metal guide, massive heavy thing that you can't manhandle, over a pile. And it's basically just this massive guillotine going shloong, and just up and down. And I just got out of SAT when they decided to send this thing down, and you're watching guys on the camera, and they're just scrambling, trying not to get their hands trapped. And after like a day and a half of struggling with this thing, they finally gave up on it, and we were back to a CP hose and a piece of rope as a guide, and it was like that would have been, so
save you a week.
yeah, you would have saved yourself a whole sea of time if you just went the simplest route first. But guys get ambitious, and unfortunately, I respect the chain of command. So even if it's a bad idea, the most you'll get out of me is I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna shit on anybody's bad idea, but I'll give it a hard pass.
That's kind of a great tip to keep in mind for all you young up and coming divers that are badasses. Is be humble.
If you're badasses,
be,
all you badasses out there,
be humble. Don't shit on people. Just don't do it.
don't yuck.
Yeah, that's all. That's all you gotta say at the end of the day is, I mean, like diving in current is another thing that fellas are notorious for. You get these supervisors, same thing, well-meaning guys that maybe didn't do as much diving time as they should have, and they tell a guy, oh well, fucking let's jump the dive, and you look over the side and you're like, nah. You see the currents humming, you drop the old tide meter on the shackle and it's skipping on the surface, and you're like, nah, there's no way this guy's making it to the job. Oh no, look, the tide's going. All right,
all
and then
you gotta do is go down there. It's over there.
Yeah, famous last words. All you gotta do is, and then you jump a guy, and you can hear this guy's huffing and puffing, trying to get to the job and all this other stuff, and so there definitely comes a point where, you are responsible for your safety, and unlike if you want to have, let's say, that kind of bell curve with the North Sea in the middle, where you can go there with your eyes closed, and there's so much safety padded around you that anybody off the street can go there and not have to worry about their safety. And then the Gulf of Mexico side, where there's so much experience that rarely are you going to be asked to do something that the person that is asking it hasn't already done.
Yeah.
You'll still get some bad ideas, but no one's going to put you in harm's way because they know that that's dangerous. And then, the other side of the pond, when you get to Asia and Southeast Asia, it's a whole different kettle of fish where, a guy that's trying to flex his muscle or authority says, hey, time to go. And they haven't never done it. And all of a sudden, some guy that's trying to please, a supervisor or whoever jumps over the side, and he's now fighting for his life on the down line or the side of the basket because he can't get to the job.
I think this is talking about all of this. I think this is a perfect time for his oh shit moment.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Hold on a second, though. We're gonna pause for a quick commercial break from Mr. DeLeese, which is perfect.
Perfect.
Right before the oh shit.
Yeah,
moment.
right before.
So if you do have an oh shit moment and you do get hurt, give this man a call. We'll be right back. And we are back.
Woo, thank God I got that number.
Boy, whose number did you? Oh, the Delise number. Yeah, I know. I called him a couple times. I think he's probably sick of me.
Yeah.
Not about work, though. That's a bad
one.
What's about work? That's too funny.
I remember hearing his name years ago. I'm glad to see he's still in the game.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Going strong.
Yeah, it's good.
Divers keep doing stuff to get hurt.
Yep.
Or just not saying no.
Right, exactly. Right. So like Johnny said, do you have an oh shit moment? Like, do you have a super close call to where like you shouldn't be alive, or
absolutely.
Maybe shouldn't have an arm?
I mean,
trying to use a guillotine.
There's a lot of near misses, but I think the biggest would be we had an emergency deco. This is like 2013, and basically we got caught out in a typhoon, in Indonesia, and once again, we could have cut and run from the weather, but my team, we had just done like 34 days in SAT or something like that. We'd gone over to decode, the new team had blown in, and around 5 o'clock in the morning, we wake up to get a menu and stuff, send it out, and you don't end up hearing anything after like 30-40 minutes and thing, and then all of a sudden the LSS, the life support supervisor, comes on, and he's like, guys, we're blowing you back down, and we're gonna pick up those guys on bottom, and then we're blowing you 10 meters over bottom. Now, if you're not familiar, for SAT, the protocol, if the boat is gonna sink or something like that, is they pressurize it, over bottom, so you can basically go down with the boat, and the chamber not flood. And at the time, we were kind of like, it's a bit of a shit deal, but more days, more dollars. Sometimes they'll bring guys over, if they're doing maintenance on the chamber and stuff. Like, we knew the weather was bad, and you could hear, like, during the course of the night, they've got the scrubber fans inside the chamber that are kind of constantly running. There's a lot of white noise in the chamber that people won't, don't necessarily appreciate. Like, when I post videos and stuff like that, you don't ever hear the ambient noise inside there. But when that noise starts to dip, it's one of the few things that will wake you up in the middle of the night, So during the course of the night, you're hearing the fans wind down and wind up, because the generators and stuff like that, the barge is losing power over the course of the night. But you just, you're not studying anything. You're on deco, you're on the home stretch. But then we get this, thing in the morning. We're going to pick those guys up and stuff. And, we don't think anything of it until, they blow us down to their storage depth. And these guys, unbeknownst to us, were already waiting inside the trunk between the main chamber and the HRC, the hyperbaric rescue chamber. And they come bursting through that door like, the devil was chasing them. So all of a sudden, now they're all scrambling into our chamber. They've got basically, they're told to grab their blankets and some other stuff. They scramble into the chamber, and the guy, the last man, is now holding the door on the other side, so they can get a seal on the main chamber. And he gets a seal there. He comes in, and not shortly after they close the door on our side, a wave hits the vessel and lifts the chamber and separates the seal. So we've now lost the seal from the main chamber to the HRC. And come to find out that what had happened was, in the season stuff, they had, because we stayed on location, as you do, for whatever reason. And during the early morning, a wave came, all four of the bow anchors got snapped, and now the barge was spinning and basically, coming 180. And we were still close enough to the jacket that there was a concern that we would hit the jacket. So, they had wanted to cut all the anchors, they remain in fort and go adrift, but they had an old Gulf hand on there, a barge foreman. He's like, get up on the winches. And as he was doing that, fortunately, it pulled us shy from hitting the platform, but it was pulling the back end of the barge down. And now we had gone from being on the stern. We were on the stern of the barge, and we've gone from being on the leeward side of the weather, because the weather's coming on the bow, to flipping 180. And now we're taking, you're talking 20-foot plus swells up the back deck, while the back of the barge is being pulled down. And there's the HRC is a fairly basic chamber, and it's kind of a workaround if you don't have a hyperbaric lifeboat for a SAT system. A lot of portable SAT systems will have an HRC with them, and they believe in these things like gospel. Everybody over that side is, there's an HRC, and but no one's ever actually used one in anger. So we're now stern into the seas, taking these swells, and every swell that hits the back of the barge has basically lifting the HRC up. It's breaking all the sea fastening, and you get this sort of sensation that the chamber is being washed in towards the crane, and then being pulled back. And we're already 10 meters over bottom, so mentally you're prepared to go down with the boat. And they come on the comms, they're like, all right guys, we're gonna launch you. And we kind of look around at one another. There's 9 of us now in a fairly small chamber. You're talking, you ever see people that live in those vans? Imagine 9 people living in a van. So now we're crammed in this thing, and we look around at one another, and it's like, nah, we can't go over, get launched over this side, because if you're lucky, first things first, you don't ever know if these things are gonna, sink or float. They're designed to float, but kind of like like an iceberg, they float just below the surface of the water. And then it's a washing machine out there, and we've got, like, they have to have like 72 hours worth of, 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 72 soda sorb, which is the stuff we use for the scrubbers and stuff like that to take the CO2 out of the gas, and we got water and stuff. So these things are packed to the hilt with other things. And once they put us over the side, you're basically in a washing machine with rocks, getting tumbled around. And so we're like, nah, we'll hang out here and just go down with the barge. We had to take a vote as to whether to get launched or go down with the boat. And everyone decided, going down with the barge seems to be the best choice. And this went on for the better part of maybe 4 hours, and the guys on deck, you could hear them because there was like a gangway around the crane tub. And so, they would, because there wasn't much room on the back deck, fellas would go down in groups to resecure the sea fastening sort of in between swells and things like that. So, we're inside, and every so often you would hear somebody yell, "Wave!" And, boom, it would hit, the chamber would lift and come back down. And, then you would hear chains and stuff start to go and fellas trying to secure things and, the clickety-clacketing of people being busy outside and someone yell, "Wave!" And everything would stop. And it's got, the HRC has a frame around it and stuff to protect it. And there's a couple ports, like head height, and you could look out and see, somebody's foot on a frame, waiting to receive like a sling from over the other side and all this other stuff to come along it down to a pad eye somewhere. And then the foot would disappear, and all of a sudden, then water would come washing over the friggin' porthole, and it was a complete gong show. Fortunately, they managed to one of our tugs just skedaddled, and then the other guy decided that he would take a chance on trying to get the tow bridle. And once they got the tow bridle hooked up, they basically pulled the barge and paid out the last anchor until it was, ran it completely off the drum. They cut the other 3 stern anchors and they pulled it out and spun the barge back around, so they were towing us into the weather. But it was for touch and go. Every minute, every wave was like, oh man, we're gonna get washed off the deck and over the side
for hours.
Yeah,
went on for hours
and hours. It was just like,
how do you get through something like that?
I mean, I tell you what, a lot of guys are quiet. Everyone's a tough guy until their ass is on the line. And there was certainly a lot of kind of minute by minute things that were going on, and then it what didn't help the situation was that every time someone would come on the comms, and by someone I mean the superintendent, it was just one bad idea after the other. So 1 minute it was like, okay, we're launching you guys, and we canceled that. And then the next minute was like, all right, guys, you're going to decompress yourselves. And it's like, how is that even going to work? You've got one team that's been in here for 34, 35 days. We've got one team that just blown in. Like, decompression schedules are all over the shop. How is that going to work? Because they were getting ready to abandon ship as well, or they were sort of thinking along that lines. And then the last one was like, all right, guys, we'll get you to surface in like, 2 hours or 3 hours. But, we were at
half you guys are going to be crippled.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you're talking going from 240 feet to surface, in a few hours. That's normally like a 3.5 day decompression. Yeah. And the question was, so, and then what? You get us out, and then what? Are you going to get a chopper out for us to take us to, a hyperbaric facility? Guys will be foaming at the mouth on deck. So it was, a comedy of errors in that sense where, at no point in time did you feel like, someone's got control of this, and I can relax now. You're just there waiting for kind of, that final shoe to drop.
So a lot of the dudes were like, pretty much, this is it.
Oh yeah.
Like, well,
after a while,
had a good run.
Yeah. Well, that's it. You just kind of like, you resign yourself to, well, you're not dead yet, and you're kind of thinking, sort of like, what happens next. I mean, if you get washed over the side, then basically, you're getting tumbled around until something hits you in the head and knocks you out. If you go down with the barge, which is, all right, but not an ideal situation, you just hope that, the gauges are working and you are really 10 meters over bottom and not coming up short and, and lose a seal when you hit bottom and then, you're drowning. So it was certainly as far as the, the kind of order of shitty things happening to you, at least in saturation, I would think, like Chris Lemons is a complete nightmare scenario. like that you don't want to happen to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Going down with the barge is a decent number two, and then like a barge fire, and being stuck in sat is a number three. That's the trifecta of your ass is grass kind of thing, as far as saturation goes.
Man, that is crazy.
Whew,
That was a good one.
that was good. I'm gonna make
Jeez.
a movie about it.
Yeah, yeah.
I tell you, I
Let's
should have
make a
quit my day
movie.
job after that.
Yeah.
You know,
Holy
it's like
cow.
Stockholm syndrome. You do something like that, and then you're back on the job
You
like
just keep coming back for
8
more.
weeks later. You're like,
Gotta get back to work.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
want to get
exactly.
fired.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
jeez.
Same thing. You don't want to get fired. I mean, some guys. It was funny because they had a big powwow after the whole thing, and everyone's kind of congratulating one another about how good of a job thing. But it's only a good job if people kind of knew what they were doing. I don't know if it's a good job if things just happen to work out right. That's I don't confuse luck with skill. You know.
Right.
So
That's
I
one of
was not
those.
happy, man, and I let it be known that this was a pretty shitty scenario. And the thing is, it could have been totally avoided. It's not like you don't know when weather's coming. You
Right.
know, all the times and that's another thing that when people compare the Gulf of Mexico to the rest of the world, like I don't know now if it's changed, but none of the SAT systems in the Gulf of Mexico when I was there had hyperbaric rescue chambers or anything like that. The protocol was if worst really comes to the worst, you get everybody in the bell and you get them off the boat, or you might put them if it's a deck system with a small deco chamber, you put everybody in there and you get them off the boat. But it never got that far because as soon as weather would come up, they would either get completely as far away from it as they could,
Mm.
or they would start decompressing you. Like they took the weather seriously down there. So when people think that it's all cowboys and craziness, there is still a certain culture of why chance it. But then on the other side, when guys have this age, because it isn't the first time I've been in a bad weather situation, and the company I was working for at the time seemed very confident in this HRC system, like yeah, like you don't have to worry about anything. All you got to do is it's like kind of driving into things head first because you've got airbags, and you're like, oh, I got airbags. It doesn't matter if I have head on collisions, but you don't want to have to rely on that
Yeah.
to not die, so to speak. You avoid running into things headlong, but they seem to like to roll those dice.
Jeez. What a great analogy. I got airbags.
Yeah,
I can go 90.
yeah.
Good.
It's so it's yeah. There's definitely a lot of I think myths, and I think a lot of misunderstandings that exist between the two cultures, and it's unfortunate because I do think the tending aspect of the Gulf system is superior to what they have over here for a host of reasons. It weeds out guys that don't want to be here. It teaches guys a lot, makes them more competent. Both in the deck, on the deck, and in the water. And everyone has a shot. Like it's not hard to get a job in the Gulf of Mexico. At least not when I was there. Like I said, if you could pass a drug test, you had a job. Whereas now, over here, and I mean, I didn't start yesterday. It's still this sort of faceless people and emails and back and forth, and you get some companies that will tell you, well, send me your CV and stuff, and come to find out that there are companies that will bid on jobs with CVs from experienced guys. They get the job, and then they turn around and they hire less experienced guys because they're cheaper.
Hmm.
You know, so
That's the
there's this sort
worst.
of mercenary culture that exists over here. Guys that will just show up for less money, and they'll pay for themselves to fly to a job and all this kind of stuff. Whereas with the tending system, there was a sense of kind of like a farm team. You have your tenders. You work the guys, you weed out the guys that you don't want to be there, and the guys that show potential. You move them up the food chain, and tenders go to divers move up the food chain, divers become supervisors become superintendents, and there's a cycle there. And there was no reason to hold people back either, right? Whereas here, guys are very, they covet information. Guys are very, they're very worried about their position all the time. So it can be it can be a bit, you know, difficult at times, and it's hard for new guys in particular to break into the industry because guys are now saying, "Oh, well, you need 2 years of experience." How are you going to get that? Unless you get offshore. So
That's true. Um, have you seen that it's a little bit easier to get into SAT if you have gone to school overseas?
I think
Like, are
so.
there
I
more green
mean,
hands overseas
if
getting
like
in?
you get a lot of green guys going in, and this is, I think the SAT ticket is given more clout than it should have because the experience is what matters, and then like the disadvantage for guys over here because the SATs start so shallow. If you're an air diver this side of the pond, you're really not getting that much offshore time because they'll do SATs from as shallow as like 60 feet, basically. Because they don't do Surdio 2 and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, you can have it's a struggle, and I've seen guys that will go as far as pencil whipping their logbook to get the requisite hours to go and do the SAT course, so they can move up the food chain. And then you'll dive with a guy, and his first time on bottom is his first time in SAT.
Oh, wow. That
And
is
now it
crazy.
becomes and if you're diving in viz, as in bad viz, there's more to the job when you can't see what you're doing. And these guys can they're a danger to themselves, they're a danger to other people. So I think paradoxically it sort of erodes safety when people just go, oh well, this guy you know from the Gulf of Mexico, he's done SATs, he's got no ticket, but we can't use it if you don't have a ticket. And now this guy is brand new, but he's done a SAT course, so let's put this guy in.
Oh, wow.
It's happened. Some guys have made it. By one guy, he had gone to a dive school and he paid for both the air and the SAT course, but he'd only done the air component because you have to go and get the dive times and stuff. But they had given him both tickets just by accident for some reason.
Jeez.
And we only came to find out when he's in the chamber. No, this is my first SAT. It's like, what? You mean this is your first SAT? Yeah, I just if he left dive school a few months ago, it'd been a lot, but it was his first time offshore, first time diving, first time in SAT, and it became very apparent very quick. And I think they then sort of had to pivot to get him out and replace him with somebody else. But you wouldn't accidentally walk into an ER and as a surgeon, just by chance because you did a first aid course and all of a sudden someone's like, doctor. And you're like, oh, what do you mean?
That's crazy because I don't think that would ever happen in the Gulf.
But this is it. Just on reputation and time served alone, you really can't fake it in the Gulf of Mexico.
No.
I mean, I think it's fairly safe to say that people either know, well, hey, this guy can carry his weight, or they can. That's not to say that everybody was a superstar. They had some guys that were really, really good. Even senior divers. When I was a tender, that I thought, well, oh, this guy's pretty good. And then more senior divers are shitting on him, going, oh, this guy isn't that good. And there's a lot of, I don't know if it's still like an ego game and a bit of a pissing match, but there was still that element of performance, and you could not fake it even without ever logging any dives or whatever. Reputation alone would kind of get you on or off a job or whatever.
Yeah.
But this side, because it is a kind of faceless scenario, guys have very impressive CVs. They've done a lot of time, or not allegedly, they've done a lot of time, they've done a lot of courses, and then they show up on a job and you lock out with them, or you see them tie a knot or something, like, so it's interesting. I mean, there are a lot of good guys. I've dove with a lot of good guys, but every so often you get those guys that slip through the wire, and you wonder, well, how did you get here? And no one's willing to speak up and say, well, hey, this is my first time doing it. You only find it out kind of after the fact, and you're like, oh boy. And it can be frustrating because once again, I feel like, I've seen a lot of senior guys and really good divers at Global, if they're tasked with something that they don't know what to do or they haven't done it before, they'll just say, there's no ego about it and stuff.
Yeah.
But, I don't know if that is a byproduct of, you've earned your stripes. So if you don't know, you don't know. No one can kind of, be vexed at you if you don't know what you're doing. But guys not wanting to show their hand will be like, oh yeah, sure, yeah, right. I've done thousands of these. Like,
Right.
well, clearly you haven't. So like very rarely will a guy put their hand up and say, well, I can't burn. I'll tell a guy, well, I'm a pretty average burner. I'll get it cut eventually. If you're going for speed, I'm not your guy. But if you're going for getting it done, I can do it in a fair amount of rods. But very rarely will a guy say, no, I can't burn. They'll just get put in and a box of rods later, and all they've done is gouge something, and then go, oh, okay, well, so and so can't burn. And I don't think anyone really cares, but I guess from an ego standpoint, no one wants to be that guy to show their hand.
Yeah, no, that's totally weird to me, and that's one of the big questions I had, between stuff that you've seen out here compared to over there. That's great that you were able to give a good answer and kind of clarify that a little bit, given, like you said, there are a lot of good divers out there, but it seems like it's a little bit more easy to slip through the cracks because
Yeah,
the reputation doesn't seem to play as big of a role as it does in the Gulf or in the
yeah,
States for the most part. Because
absolutely.
reputation is everything out here. If you
Yeah,
get
for
a bad
sure.
name, you're not working.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm
If
sure
you
they
say
still
you can
exist.
burn, you can't.
Yeah,
You're not gonna work.
yeah, absolutely. So you better undersell yourself, and surprise people and oversell yourself because if you do that one time, your goose is cooked, right? But
Yep.
this side, no one really seems too concerned, and there's a sense that because productivity is not that highly prioritized. Well, let me rephrase that. Depending on where you're working, like North Sea wise, safety is paramount. So they would rather you do something slow and safe than fast and something happen. Now it's not to say that fast is unsafe, but if you're doing something quickly and something happens, well then your ass is grass. But other places now when you get with these smaller companies that they're working on a day rate kind of thing and they're push 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 push, then it becomes a kind of different ball game. And if you undersell yourself or if you oversell yourself, then it becomes a big kind of production, and now you're in trouble. So I guess it depends on what the company is looking for and where the company is working at the time.
Have you ever seen anybody kind of like freak out in SAT?
I did have one bell partner. um, we were in West Africa, and kind of a perfect example of a clash of cultures, because they had, at the time, the office was trying to save some money, so they were using guys out of India, and you know, then the barge wasn't happy with the performance, so then they brought some international tenders and divers, back across to do the work, and we had one of the guys, an American fella, he was with me, 2-man sats. It was his first sat, I locked out first. And, because once again, different cultures, in the Gulf of Mexico, guys would sit down in the bell because everything is warm. You would sit down in the bell in like a Walmart tracksuit or something, if you had a pair of coveralls or something, it was nothing ever too crazy. But other places, they insist that you sit down in a hot water suit. Now, to wear a neoprene suit, in water that is like, 28, 29 degrees Celsius, and you've got the hot water circulating inside the bell through the umbilical and stuff, it's like a sauna in there.
Yeah.
And he just wasn't used to it. So, I locked out initially. And the procedure is basically, I mean, it's a very small bell and whatnot. And the standby hose is outside, and you have to hand the end in, and the guy hooks it up to the band mast. So, I lock out first, hand in the umbilical, and while I'm sort of waiting on the stage of the bell, I can see, like, bubbles going, and I can hear just gas and bubbles and stuff are happening left and right. And, the superintendent comes on, he's like, I think you need to pop back in the bell because, so-and-so, he's looking a bit confused and whatnot. So I lock in, take my hat off, I'm like, you all right? And he's sitting up against the umbilical, and he's got his hot water suit unzipped, just white as a sheet, sweating.
Oh,
And he's like, you could see that the heat, or I don't know if it was maybe a claustrophobia or a combination of the two, starting to get to him. And I was like, you all right? He's like, no, man, was like, you sure? He's like, yeah, I can. I said, well, if we're probably going to get decode for this, as long as you're happy to go, I'm going to support you 100% because this isn't a prison sentence, But I need to know that you're good, and you're happy to pull the pin on this. And he was happy, and so I had him sort of stand in the trunk to kind of cool off. Had to coil the bell up and coil the umbilical up and secure the bell before we left bottom. And he was. We got back, and so said they were going to decode the two of us, but then they opted to send two guys in, and one guy rode out with him, and I finished my sat with another guy. Okay. But I do like that aspect in the sense that being in sat isn't for everybody either. Mm-hmm. And you can find that out for free in the Gulf of Mexico. This side of the world, you got to pay a couple thousand, 20,000 US or whatever it is now for a sat course to then blow down and be like, this sucks. So, and it happens. I mean, there's some guys that they're nice as apple pie on deck, and then the minute you blow down with them, they flip a switch and they just they don't want to be there.
And that's also something as an experienced diver that you have to recognize, like you did. You knew something was wrong. He wasn't looking right. It was like, crap. Do I just not say anything and go to work? But then again, you're kind of SOL if something does hit the fan, because he's not going to help you.
Yeah, exactly. So it's. I mean, it was unfortunate for him, but it sometimes it happens, and that's the the other sort of thing about SAT in particular is that it's well, it should be one for all and all for one, so to speak. If a guy wants to ride out, you can't keep him back. The onus is now on the superintendent or whatever to maybe shuffle around teams or so on and so forth. But then likewise, you can't necessarily quit on your team, because you could end up having guys pulling other guys out of SAT because you had a bad day or whatever the case may be. So there's that element of it that I think people don't appreciate, or it's hard to get people to appreciate that it's it's kind of an all or nothing scenario.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you have a wife, kids, or anybody that you want to get?
I do. I have a nice. Wife and a daughter now. I mean, I started, this is only, I've been married for 10 years and my daughter's 7, but, initially it was easier as a single man, kind of, you come and go with the breeze and you don't have to worry. And this is before the days of like WhatsApp and stuff like that. I used to call my parents once a month from offshore, and that was it, no emails, no nothing. But as you get family, and that, I guess as you get older too, your perspective shifts. There are things that when I look back now that we did as tenders in the Gulf of Mexico, that if you were to ask me to do it now, I'm gonna probably not.
Exactly.
But at the time, it was like, all right, sure, and like systems that I dove and stuff like that, I don't know if I would dive them now, and but it's it is a single man's game, if you ask me. At least you perform better. You get these guys that are caught up. You're at work, and like now, I think it's almost worse in the sense. A lot of vessels have improved with Wi-Fi and stuff like that. So you have your cell phone access and things like that. And if something bad happens at the house, you know about it right now. And now you're stuck offshore, you're stuck in a foreign country, or you're stuck in SAT. And now you got to weigh this thing weighing on you. But guess what? You still got to dive tomorrow. There's no days off, so to speak, and you have to manage that. Whereas once upon a time, you would come home from 4 months offshore. Oh, so and so died. You're like, oh shoot, sorry, I missed the funeral. But now you're at home and you're realizing that someone died as soon as it happens, and you got hours notice and you got to go. So.
Yeah, so it's a blessing and a curse type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's rough. Or guys come back out of SAT and their wife's not there anymore.
Yeah. Seen that.
Man.
I was at ALST on a job, and I sent in a guy a Dear John letter. It was terrible.
Oh, wow.
And basically, obviously the LSS at the time, he would have known, the thing, and I obviously knew, what had transpired. And no one ever wants to be the bearer of bad news, but I folded it up, blew it in, and he pushed the buzzer, and he decoded out.
Hey, Billy Bob, your wife left you. Sorry.
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah. To
Oh,
get a
that's
Dare
rough.
John letter offshore is not nice. That's for damn sure.
Oh wow. Well, give a big shout out to your wife and daughter. They've
Yeah,
been barren with this trade for the past 10 years, so
yeah,
that's
yeah,
big props to them. You know, we
yeah,
love what we do, and you know we love that they stick by our side. So it's great,
yeah, for
and I'm
sure.
glad Johnny minded his p's and q's, so that way your daughter can actually listen to this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I didn't say one swear word.
You didn't. It was great.
I know. Thank you.
We're gonna catch a lot of heat for that too later on, I'm sure.
I'll make up for it later.
That's not a real diver. You didn't say bad
I mean, if
words.
you want to get like 10 minutes of swearing in now, just to even it out.
Yeah, just tell her don't listen to the last
Yeah,
10 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I'll just fucking cuss on the next one.
All right. Well, man, it's been great having you on the show. This has been an amazing episode. We learned so much about saturation on both sides of the pond. And you stay safe out there in Saudi Arabia and watch out for those
Mm-hmm.
Indian divers.
Yeah, thanks, man, and hope everything's good for you guys. I guess stay safe doing the inland stuff. I mean, by far, I think that's a little bit more sketchier a landscape than offshore is.
Johnny's a
You
little
know,
safer. I go to Louisiana and do the
Yeah.
swamp diving for probably a week out of the month. So it's going to get sketchy. The gators are starting to wake up.
oh yeah. Fortunately, I missed all the mud hole jobs.
Nice. You didn't miss much. All
Didn't
right.
miss
Well,
much.
thank you for coming on the show, and we will see everyone on the next episode of the Bottom Dwellers Dive Shack.
See you guys later.
All right, thanks.
Hold on 1 second before you go. We have to wait until it finishes uploading. It's almost there.
Roger.
What about on his end?
Yep, I'm looking at the little upload numbers.
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
top middle, so 99%. So we're almost there. Perfect. But yeah, thanks a lot for coming on. This has been a really good episode. You're gonna help a lot of divers that kind of don't know what's what. You know,
Oh, appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
just sucks you're talking to two inland guys.
No, I mean, it's I guess on a different day I would have had more questions for you guys as well because I don't know much about the inland scene, and I do get questions from time to time from fellas, and I try to steer them to the few inland guys that I do know. I try to steer them that way if that's their desire, but if they want to come offshore, I try to advise them that way.
Yeah, just tell them to send me a message. I can help out with some questions and all that.
Yeah,
The
that's
kind of
good to know.
stuff like where they want to go work and all that, But it sounds like going Gulf right out of dive school actually helped you quite a bit.
Absolutely. I think I mean, I don't know what the scene is with the dive schools there now, but, I mean, if you've been with Duke, that's all he kind of preached, right? It was going offshore or nothing, so to speak. And it does flatten the curve. But then by the same token, like when Katrina hit and they were short of divers, a lot of guys from the inland scene came offshore and, all very proficient guys. Some of them did the odd sat here or there. And I befriended one guy, and I think he did like 2 sats. And he's like, you know what? That's it. I've had enough of that. So there's a lot to be said about that scene.
Sorry, I forgot to stop the recording. That's why I wasn't uploading.